Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Your wife works hard, Richard said, lifting his whiskey glass while the fireworks cracked red and white over the country club lawn. It's admirable, really. Especially when she has to come home to, what exactly do you do again? A few people around the table laughed. My wife, Natalie, didn't stop him. Richard leaned back in his chair, smiling the way rich men smile when they think humiliation is a form of entertainment. No offense, buddy, but some people are built to lead. Some people are just adjacent to success. More laughter. Natalie looked down at her plate and took a sip of wine like she hadn't heard a thing. I remember that moment perfectly. The polished silverware. The smell of grilled steak and smoke in the summer air. The flag centerpieces. The expensive watches glinting under string lights. And Richard Mercer, my wife's boss, talking to me like I was furniture. What he didn't know was that by the end of that night, the company he was so proud of would no longer be his. And my wife would finally understand exactly who she had been betraying. My name is Caleb. I'm 39, and for most of my life I learned something important early. The quietest person in the room is usually the one everyone underestimates. I'm not flashy. I don't talk about money. I don't wear labels. I don't need attention to feel important. I grew up with a father who believed real strength was private. Handle your business. Keep your word. Don't perform your worth for people who only understand noise. I took that into adulthood. I built a career in corporate restructuring and private acquisitions. Most people hear that and imagine boardrooms and headlines. The truth is, most of my work happened behind layers of legal entities, advisors, and non-disclosure agreements. When companies were weak, over-leveraged, or rotting from the top, firms like ours stepped in quietly. We bought debt, took positions, waited, and moved when the time was right. It paid very well. It also meant I never had a clean, simple answer when people asked what I did. Natalie used to like that mystery when we first met. She said I was calm in a world full of men trying too hard. She worked in marketing then, sharp and ambitious, with that polished confidence that makes everyone turn when she enters a room. We clicked fast. I admired her drive. She said I made her feel safe. For years, I believed that was enough. The cracks started after she joined Mercer Biotech. At first, it seemed like a good thing. Better title. Better salary. More room to grow. Richard Mercer, the founder and CEO, had a reputation for being brilliant, aggressive, and politically connected. Natalie was thrilled to be brought into his inner circle. Within 6 months, our marriage started changing in ways I couldn't name at first. She became harder, more impatient, more embarrassed by me. It showed up in little ways. She started introducing me with a strange pause, like she had to decide how much of me was presentable. If friends asked what I did, she'd jump in before I could answer. Finance stuff, she'd say. It's not very exciting. At dinners, she'd correct my word choices. She bought me new clothes without asking, then got annoyed if I wore what I already owned. She started talking about optics all the time. Optics, image, access, status. Words that hadn't mattered to her before suddenly became the air she breathed. Then Richard started appearing in every conversation. Richard says leadership is about visibility. Richard thinks men who don't dominate a room get dominated by life. Richard built everything from instinct. Not everyone has that. At first I thought she was just impressed by him. A lot of people were. But admiration has a tone. So does imitation. And slowly, Natalie stopped sounding like my wife and started sounding like a student repeating a master's worldview. The first Real warning came at a charity gala. Richard shook my hand, held it a second too long, and smiled at Natalie while speaking to me. So you're the husband? I expected someone taller. Natalie laughed. That laugh stayed with me longer than the insult. After that, the boundaries kept slipping. Late-night strategy calls. Weekend retreats. Emergency brand issues that somehow required wine bars and luxury hotel lounges. Natalie grew secretive with her phone. She started changing in the guest bathroom after work instead of in front of me. Her perfume changed. Her schedule got vaguer. I asked her one night, "Are you having an affair?" She didn't even look angry. Just insulted. "Do you know what your problem is?" she said. "You confuse silence with depth. You think being unavailable makes you powerful. It doesn't. It makes you forgettable." Forgettable. I didn't sleep much that night. But I didn't accuse her again. Not yet. Because suspicion is one thing. Proof is another. And I've spent enough years in my field to know that when something feels wrong, the truth usually lives in the details people think no one will check. A week later, Natalie left her laptop at home. She almost never did that. It buzzed twice on the kitchen counter while I was pouring coffee. The screen lit up with a message preview from Richard. "Need you next to me tomorrow." He looked clueless at the gala. That part was almost sad. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened the laptop. What I found wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. Messages stretching back months. Private dinners disguised as client meetings. Hotel confirmations forwarded to Natalie from Richard's assistant. Jokes about me. Not harmless ones. Cruel ones. One message from Natalie said, "He has no idea how these rooms work. He still thinks being decent matters." Richard replied, "Decent men are useful. Until they're in the way." There were worse messages. The kind that hollow your chest out if you keep reading, and I did keep reading because once pain becomes information, you don't stop halfway. There were photos. Travel records. A discussion about timing her separation from me after the transition period at the company. Then a thread that changed everything. Natalie wrote, "If the board flips, where do we stand?" Richard answered, "It won't. I own too much and they're too scared. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, I'll have stripped what I need." Below that were attachments. Internal projections. Debt exposure. A bridge financing note. Cap table summaries. That was when the hurt in me made room for something colder. Because Richard didn't know who I was. Mercer Biotech had been on my radar for nearly a year. Our firm had begun accumulating distressed secondary debt tied to Mercer's expansion plan through 2 separate vehicles. We also held options through a private consortium that Richard had dismissed as passive capital. Publicly, I was nobody. Privately, I was one of the people preparing to force a governance event if the numbers deteriorated further. I wasn't the face of the acquisition effort. But I controlled the strategy through a blind structure and proxy votes that had not yet been fully disclosed. Richard thought he was untouchable. My wife thought I was ordinary. Both of them had been sleeping inside a storm I built. I copied everything from the laptop. Messages, files, dates, travel receipts. Then I called 2 people, my attorney and Daniel Su, lead counsel for our acquisition vehicle. I told Daniel, "I have evidence of executive misconduct, undisclosed personal involvement with a direct subordinate, and probable misuse of company resources." He was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he said, "Send nothing unsecured. Come in now." That afternoon turned into 6 hours of document review. The affair by itself was ugly, but not fatal. The problem was overlap. Natalie worked on marketing narratives tied to investor communications. Richard had used corporate travel budgets for private meetings. There were reimbursement irregularities. And most importantly, he had been moving aggressively while hiding material instability from stakeholders. We already had enough to pressure the board. Now we had blood in the water. My attorney handled the personal side. Quietly, I froze joint exposure where I could, documented the affair, and prepared separation filings. Daniel handled the corporate side. Emergency board outreach. Internal audit triggers. Preservation notices. Meeting requests timed very carefully. And through all of it, I said nothing to Natalie. That part was the hardest. She came home complaining about coworkers. She asked if I'd be attending the company's 4th of July dinner at the country club. She said it would mean a lot if I showed up and made an effort. I almost laughed at that. Made an effort. But I agreed to go. Because timing matters. The week before the dinner, I watched her become almost giddy. New dress. New jewelry. Extra time at the salon. She wasn't just dressing for a company event. She was dressing for him. I felt stupid for still being able to notice she looked beautiful. Betrayal doesn't erase love cleanly. It poisons it slowly. The night of the dinner, The country club was glowing with patriotic lights and polished money. Executives, spouses, investors, local politicians. Richard was in his element, moving from table to table like a king inspecting his court. Natalie barely stayed at my side once we arrived. She floated toward him without appearing to. That's a skill some people have. And then, after dessert, came the moment. Richard had been drinking just enough to get louder, not sloppier. He made a speech about American excellence, innovation, risk, ambition. Everyone applauded. Then he returned to the table, looked at me, and decided to entertain himself. He asked what I did. I gave him the same answer I give most strangers. Restructuring. He smirked. That sounds like a polite way of saying nothing memorable. People laughed. Then came the line. No offense, buddy, but some people are built to lead. Some people are just adjacent to success. And Natalie let him say it. She didn't touch my arm. Didn't tell him to stop. Didn't even meet my eyes. So I set my napkin down, stood up and said, "You're right about one thing, Richard. You should be very interested in who's adjacent to your success." The table went quiet, but not fully. Not yet. Richard smiled like I was trying to sound clever. "Oh, and why is that?" That was when 3 people stepped onto the terrace from the main hall. Daniel Sue, outside counsel from our firm, and Mercer Biotech's general counsel, who looked like he hadn't blinked in an hour. Richard's face changed first. Natalie noticed it and turned. Daniel spoke calmly. "Mr. Mercer, the board has initiated an emergency action effective immediately. You are being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into fiduciary breaches, undisclosed conflicts, and misuse of company funds." No one moved. Not even the waitstaff. Richard actually laughed once. "At a holiday dinner? You can't be serious." Daniel handed him an envelope. "Very." Richard opened it, scanned 2 pages, then looked up at me. Not confused. Not yet. Just searching. I said, "You asked what I do. Through Hawthorne Strategic, and through the debt positions you ignored, I represent the controlling block that just backed your removal." Natalie stared at me like I had started speaking another language. Richard's voice dropped. "You." I nodded. "Me." Then I looked at Natalie. "And before you try to pretend this is just business, I know about the hotels, the messages, the reimbursements, and the plan to leave me once this company transition was done." Her face emptied. "Caleb," she whispered, "not here." It's amazing how often people choose public betrayal and private accountability. I said, "Here is exactly where both of you wanted power. So here is where you can lose it." The general counsel then informed Natalie she was also being suspended pending investigation due to her involvement in communications and expense approvals. Richard exploded after that. Denials, accusations, threats, the usual collapse of a man who has spent too long being protected from consequences. People were staring openly now. Some recording. Some pretending not to. Fireworks were still going off over the golf course, and somehow that made the whole thing feel even crueler. Red flashes in the sky while 2 carefully polished lives cracked wide open under string lights. Natalie tried to pull me aside. I stepped back. "No," I said. "You were comfortable when he made me small. You can be uncomfortable now." I left before the scene finished burning. That was the beginning, not the end. Richard's suspension became termination within weeks. The audit widened. There were clawbacks, regulatory inquiries, and civil exposure tied to expense misuse and disclosure issues. He didn't go to prison, but he lost the company, his reputation, and the myth that had protected him. Natalie's fall was quieter, but in some ways worse. She lost her position, then her network, then the social confidence that had been built almost entirely on proximity to powerful people. Once people understood what had happened, invitations stopped. Messages slowed. Her version of herself couldn't survive without an audience. Our divorce was efficient. Painful, but efficient. I didn't fight for spectacle. I fought for closure. And when it was over, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Relief. Relief that I no longer had to shrink myself to keep someone else comfortable. Relief that I no longer had to sit politely while people mistook restraint for weakness. Relief that the truth had finally caught up with the performance. These days, my life is quieter, cleaner. I still do what I've always done. I build positions. I solve problems. I move carefully. But now I also protect my peace with the same precision I once reserved only for business. Sometimes people ask if I plan the whole thing. The dinner. The timing. The public collapse. I planned for the truth to surface. They chose the stage themselves. And maybe that's why I can live with it so easily now. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped standing in the way while they exposed themselves. Richard called me a no one at the company's 4th of July dinner. What he didn't know was that real power rarely introduces itself. Sometimes it just waits, listens, and signs the papers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.